Good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday morning of mid-semester break, and I wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up video to the TV app that I did in the lecture last week. So for anyone that's interested, I'm going to extend it in a couple of ways. The first is I'm going to put a table view before this that allows us to select from a few different TV shows, and I'll use the ones that were suggested in the chat in the live stream for the lecture. And the other thing I'm going to do is add episode images. So use some of what we learned to download episode images and display these inside our table view cells. So this is sort of just an interesting extension for those of you that want to see how we can take this a little further. The other thing that I showed at the very end of the lecture stream, which I'm not sure exactly when the lecture stream cut off, but you might have missed this. We have these episode synopses, which are of varying length, but we have them currently in a UI label, which is a single line. It's actually trivially easy to have UI labels display multiple lines and determine their height from the amount of text. And this means if we've got our constraints set up to constrain the UI label to the views above it and to the bottom of the table view cell, the table view cells will automatically resize. And the process for this is as easy as selecting the label. It's this one here. And over on the right here, we have this lines property, and we just need to change this lines property to 0. And if we do 0, it doesn't assume a fixed number of lines. It uses as many lines as necessary. And if I literally just rerun this project, now you can see that we've got varying height table view cells all automatically computed purely based on the text that's in each table view cell. So that's really nice. Okay, let's jump into these other changes. The first change I'm going to do is to add a new table view controller. And let's do that now. So I'll open the library, UI table view controller. This table view controller we're going to embed in a navigation controller. And this table view controller I'm going to create a custom class for. New files, UI table view controller, and I'm going to call this shows table view controller, shows list. Okay, let's set that custom class of this before we forget. Yeah, I'm just going to use the custom cell here and set a reuse identifier on it to show cell. All right. Okay, so we can use the default label that's inside these, so we don't need to set up any views here in this case. So what am I going to do? For my shows, and one more thing we'll do actually is we'll set our navigation controller to be our initial view controller, so that the this is the entry point into our app. That should be the navigation controller, sorry. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to go into my shows table view controller, and I'm going to add here an array of dictionaries. And this is something I wrote before based on the shows that came up in the lecture. Someone just said Flash. I assume this means The Flash, the current TV show and not the one from the 1960s. But if you meant the one from the 1960s, you can obviously go in and edit the show IDs. So these are the same show IDs that I just got with the same method I used in the lecture. All right, all we're going to do here is change this so that the number of sections here is 1. We've got our list of shows there, and we're going to take the count as the number of rows. And for each cell, we're going to dequeue our show cell, and for each of these cells, we're just going to say cell dot text label dot text is equal to, and say shows dot index path dot row, and we're going to say the show title property, show title. No. So because this is oh yeah, I'll tell you what I should do. I should say show title, because this is just a dictionary, so it doesn't have a property. I have to access it like this as string. Okay, so it's got an any type because it can have numbers or letters. Okay, so at a minimum, we should now have a table view with like 5 entries. Okay, so that looks good. We can tap on these, nothing happens. So all we want to do now is make it so that we can transition to the other table view. So let's do that in our storyboard. We can just delete our navigation controller here, and from this table view cell, I'm going to control click over here and say show. So when we click on this cell here, we're going to transition to our episode list. So what I'm going to do is for my episode list, I'm going to create a variable here called show info, and that's just going to be one of these dictionary entries with string any. Probably should have created this as a struct. If I'd created it as a struct, I wouldn't have to keep working out the types everywhere. Actually, let's just make this an optional, and then we can set a value of it. Okay, so there's show info. We're going to set this at the beginning. We're going to use that to get our ID here. So, and we're also going to use it to get. No, that's all we're going to use it for. In fact, you know what? Because I didn't plan out any of this, I'm just doing it on the fly. So this is why it makes sense to plan out something ahead of time. I'm just going to change this to show ID and make it an integer, and it can be an optional. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to change this here and say guard let show ID equal to show ID. So basically try and unwrap it. If that doesn't work, we're going to just give an error message and say print no show ID specified. And I'm going to just return here. So I can't do any damage. And then here in my string, I'm going to give show ID. Yep. In fact, I need to give it down here. What am I doing? All right. Should be happy now. And I need to specify in my prepare for segue, I need to pass that show ID. So let's do that. And here somewhere I've got my prepare for segue. I didn't give an ID to my segue, so I should probably do that. Call this episode list segue. If segue dot identifier is equal to episode list. Okay, so now what we want to do is get the cell. So we can do that by saying let cell equal to sender as UI table view cell, because it doesn't have a custom class. And we want to, well, I can do all this in an if statement. So let's say let if cell equals this, and then we want to also base it on if let index path is equal to my table view controller, or table view I should say, table view dot index path for table view cell. And if both of those are true, then we're going to get a copy of our controller, and that's the segue dot destination and we can force unwrap or cast this because we know what it is, and its type is show list, this one. And then we can say controller dot and give it show ID. Oh, I've said description again. I said this should be destination. That's why it's complaining there. Destination. Okay, and then here I should be able to say show ID. My show ID is equal to shows and index path dot row, and we want show ID as an integer. Shows list has no, oh, because it's not called shows list, it's the episodes list. Oh my goodness, okay, so let's try this. So I should go click on Firefly, it loads Firefly. If I go back, I click on Game of Thrones, it loads Game of Thrones. If I go back, click on Mr. Robot, it loads Mr. Robot, and if I click on the Expanse, we see the Expanse. If I click on the Flash, I see the Flash, maybe. So this is either something where this is where maybe I'm not building error checking in. Perhaps I have the ID of the Flash wrong. I don't know. Let's just go back and see. Expanse on loads. The Flash one doesn't, or there's something wrong with the data there. Okay, I have a show ID of 13 there, so that's fine. The next thing I'm going to do is have a look at the data that gets returned from it. May as well debug this while we're here. And I mean, we didn't see any console about a bad URL or anything. So print URL. Let's have a quick look at this in a browser. So let me investigate this and we'll see what we have here. So this is what it returns. We have a name, so the only things we really look at to remind you from the structure that we're reading in show data, and we're reading the name and the embedded property. We're expecting embedded to be an array, and it's an array of these codable objects which have a name, a season, a number, and a summary. So maybe some of this is not strictly correct. So we've definitely got a name because this is here. Make this a bit bigger. We have a name. We have our embedded property. Embedded contains a list of episodes, and they each have a name, a season, a number, and a summary. So that looks good. I don't actually see any problems there, and we've obviously got a number of episodes, so something is going wrong. All right, so let's see, what do we see here? Let's go back. All right, this is where we're going to set a breakpoint and have a look at fix up a typo while I'm here. Okay, so let's step through here. Okay, so this obviously doesn't work. We get stuck somewhere decoding this, and probably what I would guess is that one of these shows has some kind of malformed content, as in, sorry, not one of these shows, one of these episodes. Like if we go to the end, maybe there's an episode without a synopsis. Yeah, so like here's an episode, and it's got number, season, and a summary of null. Okay, so it turns out that we can't just expect that every episode has a summary. That's not going to work. Okay, so how do we deal with something like this? I mean, look, and how I could potentially find this is I could step through the decoding. So basically stepped through here line by line, and I would have found that this summary here would have tried to get the summary and thrown an error here. And if we had to do catch block where we weren't just trying this, and if it threw an error, making an optional value of nil, then we would have been able to see what this error was. So this is the dangerous way of just writing code like this without wrapping in a do catch block where you've got some error handling. So for this case, I think I know the problem, and it's purely a matter of making this one optional. And when I make this optional, it will we can basically try and do this. If it fails, it's going to return nil, and then I can say if let summary equals self.summary and summary self.summary. Okay. So probably have to fix up somewhere else in the code because the optional, maybe not. Let's see. Okay, so look, now it works. That was a small detour while we figured out that. And somewhere at the end, there'll be some episodes that don't have summaries yet. Show has a lot of episodes. How many seasons are we going to do? 6 seasons? There we go. Okay, so these are ones probably that are showing very soon or currently on TV. Okay, so look, there's our things. Probably we should give this a title and say TV shows or something. So I will do that. And now what I wanted to do is add some images to, take away this breakpoint. Add some images here to each episode because each episode has optionally an image associated with it. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to start by adding an image view to my table view cells, and we could be clever about constraints. I'm going to do this in a simple way. So I'm just going to drag this down. I'm going to grab a UI image view. There it is. I'm going to put this UI image view here. Looking at some of these constraints, we were just spacing these by 6 or 12. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to constrain this to the edge by 0 on the left and the right, to the thing above by 12, and to the bottom of the view by 0. Now, what I haven't done is determine the actual size of this image view. So we know that we want just widescreen images. So I can also set a aspect ratio constraint on this, which is under this menu somewhere. Where is it? Aspect ratio. And with the aspect ratio, I can click OK. And my aspect ratio, if I double click on it, it has a multiplier here, and there's some predefined ones like 16 by 9, which is our widescreen one. So I'm just going to set that to 16 by 9. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm obviously going to set up an outlet so I can refer to this. So let's open up my assistant here, find my table view cell. I'm going to use this image view, and I'm going to create an outlet and just call it, I don't know, episode image view, episode image view. All right, so I've got my episode image view. Great. All right. There's a couple more things that I'm going to do here because I'm going to need to load these images, and I don't want to load them each time one of my table view cells is displayed, because I might scroll past the cell and then scroll back to the cell. I'm actually going to store the image views in my data structure that I had for the show data. So that's in here. All right, so here's my data for a particular episode. These 4 properties are the ones that come from the API, but there's nothing stopping me from adding a couple more properties here. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to call one of these let's put a comment, say used to track image downloads, and I'm going to say first here have something called download task identifier, because I'm going to create download tasks for downloading each of these things, and this will be nil initially, so it'll be an optional, or it'll be an integer. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have var an image, which is the image I'm loading, and this is going to be a UI image, which is how UIKit stores images internally. This is going to be an optional too. So basically the idea is here for each of these, as I need to display them, I'm going to launch a download task in the way that we talked about in the lecture, and save and identify here. So I know then if I retry and load this episode, I know that there's a download in progress. Then when that download is finished, it's going to save its image into here. So I can check the optional value for the image here and know if an image has been loaded, or if a task identifier is set, then the image download process has started and I'm kind of waiting for it to finish. All right, so that's going to be my sort of simple plan for the moment. The other thing is, if we have a look at the data here, let's have a look at one of these episodes. So one of these episodes has an image property, and that's an object with a medium and an original property, and they're just URLs. Okay, so let's change our data structure that we're loading to account for this. So first of all, we're going to now have var image, and we are going to have something that we're going to call, what are we going to call this? Episode image info, or data, because we're calling all these data. All right. So that's what we've got here, and I can create this structure. It's just going to look like this. Episode image data. It's going to be codable as everything else was before, and it's going to have 2 properties. It's going to have a medium one, and it's going to have an original one, and both of these are just going to be strings. And original, and this is going to be a string. All right. Now, something to realize about this is probably, and this is where we should go and look at the API as well, but I'm guessing that some of these ones won't have images, right? So we can see there's no images property for these new episodes that are here. So this is where we look at the documentation and check, but also then this one should just be an optional as well for the same reason. So I can't use image in 2 places here. If you can hear some violin in the background, that's my daughter practicing her violin. I can't use the same property images, so I'm going to call this one image URLs. That seems like a reasonable thing to do. Because I've got my own initializer here, I'm going to need to do the same thing, and I'm going to say image URLs, and the type for this is going to be episode image data. The other thing that I'm going to need to do is do this coding keys trick, because the original property name is called image, but the one I'm using is image URLs here. So I'm going to need coding keys. I'm going to need to specify name, season, which can just be season, number, which can just be number, summary, that can just be summary. And for image URLs, which is the property name we're using, we just want the property inside the JSON to just be image. All right, with that, it should work again. We just won't be doing anything with the images yet. Oh, and probably so my images are not displaying here. Why are my images not displaying here? Good point. Well, because I've still got a constraint on the bottom of this label that constrains the bottom of the table view cell to be in line with this, and that's overriding. So I'm going to find that bottom space constraint to the super view, and I'm going to remove it. And it now has a bottom space to the episode image as well. So if I select that and delete it, with any luck, I now see some empty table view cells as part of my cells, and I do. So that's the table view cell for that one. There's a table view cell for that one. I mean, table view cell. There's the image view inside the table view cell for each of those. All right, let's do our final thing here. Let's do our image downloading. So what are we going to do here? We are going to, down here where we set up a cell, we're going to write some logic. And the logic that we're going to do is we're going to check if the episode has images. If the episode has images. So how are we going to do that? We're going to say if let image URLs be equal to my episode dot image URLs. Okay. If that's the case, we want to do something else. And what we want to do is we want to check, basically, has a download been started already? Well, actually, let's check if we've got an image. So let's say if we have an image already, so how would we do that? If let image equals episode dot image, and that was an optional, right? So if there's an image, we want to do one thing. And the thing we want to do here is pretty easy. We would say cell dot episode image view dot image equals our image. Okay, great. So that's our logic for if an image has already been assigned into that object. If it hasn't, we want to do something else, which is if no download has started, we want to start one. So how do we check if no download has started? Well, we'd say if our episode dot download task identifier is equal to nil. All right, if it's equal to nil, then we haven't ever set a task identifier for it. So if this is the case, we want to download an image, and at the same time, we want to set this download task identifier. So here's a little problem. We can't just say, I'm going to write some code here, and that's not going to work, and then we'll talk about why. So episode dot download task identifier is equal to, and we want to spawn a download task here. I'm going to do this in a function just so download episode image, let's say. And my function here should take the image URL, and I'll say image URL is equal to episode dot, no, we've got image URLs dot medium. Should be fine. All right, so let's write this function. So here's my function. It's called download episode image. And it takes an image URL, which is a string. Probably should call it episode image URL string or something, but that's fine for the moment. And what do we want to do here? We want to create a session download task, and when it finishes, we want to set the result into the image. Let's just put a print here and we'll see this working, right? So I'm going to just print the image URL so you can see us requesting these URLs as we scroll through the table view. And I'm not going to do anything else for the moment. I'm just going to return, I don't know, a value of 1. Oops, should probably put my return type here. Integer. Episode is a lat constant. All right, I can change the var, but okay, so you can see us requesting a bunch of images here. And as I scroll through the table view, you should see more of them appear, right? So that's happening on demand as I'm scrolling through. And then because I'm setting a value for each one, once I've scrolled past it once, you wouldn't expect to see any more. Interestingly, I am seeing more. And what's going on here is an interesting side effect of using structures. When we use structures and we assign them to a variable, they are assigned by value rather than by reference. When you do this with classes, this variable ends up being a reference to the class. And if you change something via this variable, it changes in the class itself. That's not true with a structure. Here, it's actually making a copy of this structure and putting it into episode. And then if I change something in the structure, like here, it's not actually changing it in the original. So the next time I look at it, I don't see it. So actually, what I need to do is I need to refer to the object directly when I change it. So this is just something you need to be careful of with structures. So now if I run this, at least, when I scroll through the table view, it shouldn't be requesting the image for something that I've seen before. Like I scroll through it, you see this, and basically it's done after that. Okay, and on a really big one, it won't load all the cells at once. And then as I scroll through at some point, it will request the additional ones, which is what we're seeing happen now. So, on a small table view with not too many cells, it will request all of them because it requests both what it needs for on screen plus some that are off screen, so it can very quickly load them and display them as they're scrolled through. Let image URL equals image URL from, I call this image URL string, just so we're not confusing what is a string and what's a URL. Okay, so image URL string, image URL is image URL string. Dot, I'm going to say replacing occurrences of. One of the things we notice with this is HTTP, and by default our apps always want us to use HTTPS. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to replace HTTP in the URL with HTTPS. And we'll see that now. Now I'm going to create a URL from it. So let image URL equals a new URL from a string, and this will be image URL string. Okay, and assuming this this works, which this can fail, so I'm just going to say if image URL. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to write it this way. So I didn't think about this before I did it. I'm kind of just doing this on the fly. I'm going to say let task equals session dot download task. And when we create a download task, we give it a URL, an image URL. All right. And then to start the task, we have to tell the task to resume. Okay, and then from a task, I can always get a task identifier. Task, I think this is dot identifier. Task identifier, I have to look this up. URL session data task. Okay, so here it's from session task. Session task has resume, and it has a task description and a task identifier. Okay, so task identifiers are integer. All right, so that's fine. This is task identifier. All right, so that's what we're going to return here, our identifier. Now, typically in the past, we've been using the default URL session. So we've done something like URL session dot default or shared. I can't remember if it's shared. Yeah, shared, right? So you'd have something like this, and this code will all compile fine and work. In the past, we've used this shared URL session, as I said, with a completion handler. But we can also use the delegate thing. So for this, we're going to need to create our own URL session so we can assign a delegate. And how I'm going to do that is as a property of the class up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let config equals URL session configuration dot default. Okay, so we're going to take the default URL configuration. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say var session. This is our session. We want to just do this lazily, so we're going to use this same pattern where we say var URL session equals, and then we're going to give a function here that's going to get called and will return to us this session. And what this session needs to look like is basically this: return a new URL session, and we call initializer with a configuration and a delegate. So it's this version here. So the configuration is our config. I don't know why it was not taking that. Okay, our delegate is going to be self, this own class. So we're going to write the delegate methods in a second. And our operation queue is just going to be, it can just be the standard operation queue. Okay, so now we have a session. What we haven't got is our delegate methods. What's this complaining about? Oh yeah, right, because we're not implementing this protocol yet. So what I need to do to implement the protocol is to implement the URL session data task methods. So what do we want here? We want URL session delegate So that's it. Happy there. Now, what we're going to do here is have a couple of delegate methods. So I'm going to create a new mark here, and this mark is going to say URL session task delegate methods. And again, for those that don't realize, these are just marks. These marks just show up in here. So there's the new one I just created, URL session task delegate. It's just a way of grouping different parts of the class to make it easier to find things and to read. So I'm going to have a couple of ones here. I'm going to say function, and I'm going to say URL session, and I want the progress one, let's say. So I guess it's not going to find this because I do want download task as well. So that's probably not data task, it was URL session. Download delegate. Okay. URL session delegate, URL session download delegate. Okay, I think that's what I should need. And maybe this will do my completion now. So URL session. Okay, yeah, now I've got my download task. So, okay, what do I want? I want two delegate methods. I want the one for the download task did finish. So download task did finish downloading too. We definitely want this one because that's the one that says that we're finished. We want URL session, and it's the one that does progress, which is called did write data. Session did write data. It should be this one. Download task, download session did write data, bytes written. Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm going to have a little bit of code here that basically says if my total bytes expected to write is greater than 0, I don't need brackets because we're not programming in C, then I'm going to say let progress equals, and just going to cast this to a float point number so that when I divide, I'm not going to get an even number, but I'm going to get a proportion. So I'm going to cast total bytes written, total bytes written divided by float. Probably only one of these needs to be cast to float, but total bytes expected to write. Okay, and then I'm going to print progress, and this should be pretty quick, but we'll just have a look at this. And for each one, I can show progress. The other thing that I can do is I can show a description. So each of these, you can get a URL from it. So I can, here I can choose the download task that's passed to me. So download task, and I can say dot current request, and which I know that there will be a request for this one, so it's safe to do this. And I can say dot description, and with this description, I think this will print the URL that's being printed, so we should be able to see what the progress is. So there's my progress. What do I need to do for my code when this did complete? Okay, well, let me do this. Let me say let my So this is a download task. So this is going to be image data that's saved to a file. So we could be clever about this later on, about storing this somewhere. But for the moment, I'm just going to let my data equals data and get the location, which is this URL here. So if I say data, one of these is contents of URL, and also you'll notice that says it throws. So there's a bunch of things that can go wrong here in throws. So I'm going to put this whole thing in a do catch block. So let's take this bit, let's put try here, let's write our catch, and let's put just a error.localized description. I'm just going to print the error if something goes wrong. Okay, so assuming I've got some data, I need to work out which episode this data corresponds to. So the way I can do that is each of my episodes has a download task identifier, and I have a download task identifier because there's a property of this download task that I can use. So if I look through each of the episodes, I can find which one matches and add it back in there. Because of the way that I have these structures, I'm going to need my index. So in order to do this, I'm actually going to write the array where I iterate through each of the indices of my episodes array. So let's do that. I'm going to write this as var cell index. I'm going to use an index of -1, as in like before the beginning of the array, to indicate I didn't find it for whatever reason if something goes wrong. So I'm going to use this variable as a way of figuring out when I've found the cell or the episode that corresponds to the cell. Because also then I'm going to need to update that cell in the table view. So, I'm going to write for index. Here's my indexes I'm iterating through. Start at the beginning of the array, 0, while it's less than episode.count. And for each of these, I'm going to say let episode equals episodes.index. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. I'm going to say if my episode dot was it task identifier download task? If my episode download task identifier is equal to the download task that's been passed into this function and its download task identifier or task identifier, whatever it's called. What is it called? Task identifier? Come on. Yes, task identifier. Okay. If they match, then I'm going to need to update the image associated with this episode. So again, because it's a struct, I need to refer to the episode directly and get the index and call image, and it's equal to a new UI image where I give it some data, and that data is literally just my contents of the file. So that looks good. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, that's the cell I need to update. So I'm just going to say cell index is equal to my index. And then once I've dropped out of this loop, I know I need to update that one table view cell. So that looks good. So if my cell index is greater than or equal to 0, as in I found something, if I found the episode cell to update, then we need to tell it to reload and add the image. And we know that we've already modified our code for loading the cell, so it's just a matter of really getting it to reload. So to do this, I would say table view dot reload rows, right? And we say at index path, and here I just give an array of index paths, and in this case, we need to create an index path. So I'm going to specify an array. I'm going to call the index path constructor, and when I give an index path, I can say row and section. So my row is my cell index, and my section is just section 0. And the animation type is just automatic. That's fine. Now, the only other problem with this is that this code is potentially being called on an operations queue in the background, and it's not safe to do UI changes, as in changes to the interface through here. So this is one of these cases where we need to use this dispatch main. Dispatch main. Oh, sorry, dispatch queue main. Dispatch queue main dot async. Right. So it's basically saying at the next convenience, call this code on the main thread. That's the UI thread, and that just causes the table view to update. Okay, I might have missed something. Who knows? Let's run this and see. If it doesn't work, probably got something wrong. Okay, so there are a couple of errors. What's the error here? My image URL can be nil if the URL is not well formed. So this code is not very safe. And I started to write this with an if statement, and then I got lazy. I should have just done it properly. So if my image URL is, not nil, then we're going to create a task and we're going to resume the task. Now, okay, in that case, we can return a task identifier of that actual integer. In this case, we should return, I guess, just nil. And let's make the return value an optional then. And then that's fine because our download task identifier was already an optional. So if it fails, we just return nil and nothing happens. So what happens now? Let me see if I've broken anything else. Oh, right, so this is a closure, so we need to use self to refer to the table view. Why didn't it suggest the fix? Let's just add it ourselves. Whoa, there you go. So we saw the progress listed, and for each one, it turns out that everyone just gives one straight away. So it basically means that these images are small enough that they get loaded in one chunk. So you would see multiple progress updates, I guess, if the files were larger. And as we scroll through, I can clear this, the console down here as I scroll through at some point. I guess these have already been all preloaded, but if I pick something bigger like Game of Thrones, we'll get the initial ones loaded, and you see the table view, it reloads those cells as it comes in. Then at some point, let me clear this again. As I scroll down, it's going to load additional ones, right, as I get to them. And you're not really going to see this because it happens so quickly. Maybe if I use the original ones, I assume the original of these is bigger than the medium ones, so they might take longer to load. And if I do something like change the size of this round, and we see that, I might just change it to the original ones for a second and have a quick look. So medium, original. See if these are larger. Yeah, you can see the quality is much better of those. Okay, cool. So I'm going to finish up there. That was a bit of a demonstration of how we could use URL session configuration and set a delegate and have some calls that handle delegation. You saw a way where I could um, store a task identifier with a number of different things, and you saw that a lot of images got loaded in at the same time in parallel, basically, and they just got loaded in and associated with individual episodes and caused the table view to reload those episodes. So this has just been a kind of video that shows a bit more complexity of how we can use downloading and also images and extend upon some of the stuff that we did in the lecture demo. So I hope you'd enjoy it. Hope you've enjoyed it and have a good rest of the mid-semester break.